Praise be Jesus and Mary. In today's first reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Thessalonians, the apostle exhorted the Christians of Thessalonica to avoid idleness or laziness, a vice in itself, and which is the seedbed for yet more vices. As such, Christians should be careful to avoid this vice and cultivate the opposing virtue of diligence in work. In this letter, St. Paul reminds the Thessalonians that while he was among them, he worked in toil and drudgery, working night and day in order not to burden any of you. St. Paul was diligent, first of all, in his work of preaching the gospel. That was his primary task, but also in his other work, that of a tent maker. And perhaps when he was not busy preaching and he had some downtime, he avoided idleness himself and spent time working as a tent maker. In fact, when he wrote this letter, St. Paul was living for a time at Corinth with the Jewish convert Aquila and his wife Priscilla, and worked with them since they too were tent makers. And while there, hearing about the idleness of the Christians at Thessalonica, and an idleness among them which very readily led to the vice of gossip and minding others' business instead of their own, the apostle quickly sent this letter to them to correct that sinful behavior. And it was a letter that had to be followed up with another letter. And this time, St. Paul would repeat in it and reinforce the same message, stating that if anyone was unwilling to work, neither should that one eat. We are familiar with that quote. As Christians, we are to value and appreciate human work rightly in a balanced way, avoiding any extremes. Work is not to be overestimated as the be-all and the end-all of human life and existence, but neither is it to be despised and avoided at all costs. When Christ Jesus came into this world, he redeemed mankind, and therefore he redeemed all that is genuinely human, including human work. We might speak of a gospel of work, a phrase perhaps used by St. John Paul II in his encyclical letter on human work, Laborem Exercens, in 1981. But in this letter, he certainly spoke of a spirituality of work. In any case, Christ did in some way redeem human work, and by working himself as an ordinary laborer, artisan, and carpenter, Jesus gives us the most perfect example to follow. Next in line, of course, Mary and Joseph, who also spent much of their lives in ordinary work, but doing it so diligently and lovingly. Besides being a normal and efficacious way to cultivate good character traits in us, work has become with Christ also a means of growth in holiness, personal holiness, and also as a means of apostolic activity, as in the apostolate of giving good example in the workplace and one's behavior, conduct, attitude, and so forth. And this applies to any kind of licit work. So Christians are called to holiness not despite their work, but through their work. The work of a doctor, lawyer, teacher, businessman, accountant, clerk, secretary, computer technician, shopkeeper, cook, housewife, cashier. These are all ways to personal holiness. And of course, to do so with a generous spirit, with diligence, patience, sacrifice, and hopefully with joy and love. Let us conclude our reflections today from a quote from St. Jose Maria Escriva, who spoke a lot about the sanctification of work. He says this: "Sanctifying one's work is no fantastic dream, but the mission of every Christian, yours and mine." That is what the lathe worker had discovered when he said, "I am overwhelmed with happiness when I think how true it is that while I am working at the lathe and singing all the time, on the outside and on the inside, I can become a saint. How good God is." Praise be Jesus and Mary.